Hello, everyone. Welcome. We will wait a few seconds and minutes while everyone joins. Hello, Luis. Hello, Anne. Hello, Cynthia. Good morning and good afternoon or good night for you, Cynthia. And welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for this exciting conversation. We're very thrilled to have our three panelists, and we will have the fourth one joining us in a few minutes. And so we will probably kick it off now. It's 1 minute past. So welcome everyone to this Skoll World Forum ecosystem session called From Borneo to the Amazon, Reimagining the Relationship with Forests. We're excited to be here, and we're also very lucky to have four incredible panelists joining us today from all over the world. I will introduce them shortly. This is a session powered by them, by Ashoka Fellows. Ashoka is a global network of social entrepreneurs working towards an everyone a changemaker world, and they are a living proof of this vision. And during this last year, and in partnership with our colleagues at the Skoll Foundation, at Ashoka, we have been deep diving into the subject of tropical deforestation, concretely in the Amazon and in Southeast Asia. And so before we start, I would like to frame the conversation around the topic of deforestation. We know forests matter, and they matter very much. They are home to 80% of our terrestrial life. They provide 2.4 billion people with their basic needs and livelihoods, and they basically help keep our climate stable. And although we know this and we know how important forests are, 90% of the world's forests have already disappeared. And so the burning question for all of us, including us at Ashoka, is how do we shift the decision-making process to stop deforestation globally? And so with this goal, today we will talk about indigenous peoples and local communities. We will talk about land rights and property rights, and we will talk about new markets and economic models. And we will not only focus in the solutions or best practices around the world, but more in the frameworks behind these solutions. Frameworks that bring environmental change closer to people in a way that also empowers them to be nature changemakers, if we could call it this way. My name is Alexandra Michans, and I co-lead Ashoka's work around planet and climate. And today I am joined by incredible and fascinating panelists from Southeast Asia and South America. I will start with Cynthia Ong. She's the co-founder of Forever Sabah. Hello, Cynthia. Forever Sabah is a collaborative social movement that supports Sabah's transition to a diversified, equitable, and circular economy. We also have Anne Dumaliang. She's the co-founder of the Masungi Georeserve. Hello, Anne. The Masungi Georeserve is a beautiful georeserve 1 hour away from Manila. It's a 2,700 hectare conservation and geotourism project that is self-sustaining, that is regenerative, and that is responsive to organized crime in the Philippines. We also have Luis Fernando Guedes, an agronomist by heart. He's the knowledge director of SOS Mata Atlântica, which is an organization that is currently defending what remains of the Mata Atlântica in Brazil. And he's also the former director of Imazon. Welcome, Luis. And then we will be joined by Adalberto Verissimo in a few minutes. Beto is the co-founder of Imazon, a Brazilian research institution that focuses in conservation and sustainable development in the Amazon. Welcome, all of you. Thank you for being here today. And I'm curious if we can do a round and see where you're all connecting from. We can start with you, Cynthia, which is probably later at night.
Yeah, it's 8:05 p.m. for me. I'm in the northern tip of the island of Borneo. Yeah, it's dark, as you can see. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Anne, What's that beautiful background?
Well, I'm calling in from Manila actually, but the landscape I have in my background is the restoration site that we have. So this is the area that we've managed to restore in the last 20 years. I'm sure I'm not supposed to go into detail yet, but I'm calling in from Manila, also the same time zone as Cynthia.
Thank you. And Luis?
Hello, everyone. It's 9 a.m. for me. I'm calling from Piracicaba, city in the state of São Paulo, Southeast Brazil. Thank you very much. Let's have a good conversation.
Bem-vindo. Welcome, everyone. Thank you. So let's kick it off, and let's start with the perspective of indigenous peoples and local communities, which is, of course, a hot topic in the field. And there are many, many examples of innovative ways of structuring these communities around forests. And Cynthia, you have a lot of experience in shifting this relationship tissue almost, no, between the different parties in the communities around forests, and you also do it in a very systemic way. How do you do it?
Well, I think it's less about structure. You use the word structuring, and more about process. We use what we call a facilitative approach. I'm sure this word is not new to you, but it invites and gathers diverse people, diverse groups on all sides of an issue. And then it tends to the process, using methodologies, using tools to support generative, even healing conversation. The old regimes of colonization of the past, really deployed divide and rule. And divide and rule has caused, a lot of wounds and a lot of suffering in communities, and trauma even on all sides. And we then build walls to protect that trauma. And those walls become, habits, become barriers to us coming together and solving solutions, finding solutions and collaborating on action. So to us, it's about creating spaces to grow that relational tissue. So focusing on the spaces in between rather than the silos or the boxes that we're all in. How do we put our attention to the spaces in between to tend to relational tissue? I think the knowledge of what to do is there. It's inherent in people who live with the land or live close to the land. It's the relational capacity that we need to surface the group wisdom and action, collective action.
The spaces in between to tend to the relationship tissue. That's very powerful, Cynthia. And how do you connect all of this frame into a context of what we've talked before, no? Of the carbon heist and its connection to the indigenous people? Because the question is not so much if carbon markets will exist, but more how they will function both for nature and for the people, no? So what are your thoughts in this space? What concrete work have you been doing here in this relationship tissue?
Yeah, so for those who are not aware, in November last year, we learned that our political leaders had signed away 2 million hectares of our protected areas into a 100-year deal with a Singaporean company. It was actually 100-year plus 100 years. And this was done completely in secret. There was no consultation, and we woke up and we learned about it. So, some people said, well, what's wrong with that? This is a good thing if, it can bring income and it can protect the forest, for 100 years or 200 years. I think for us, it was fundamentally the process that was flawed. A few people making a decision like that was going to impact 4 generations of people and, encompass something like half of our forested areas is something that required a much deeper, more engaged process. so there's the macro picture, like a 2 million hectare 100-year deal. And then there's the micro, the lives, the livelihoods, and on the ground. And I see that facilitative processes can build the human crosswalk, where the top down and the bottom up can meet, can gather. Deploying these kinds of tools and modalities, we need to hear, we need to draw out, we need to weave together and calibrate, above and beyond the sum of its parts. And, inclusivity is so powerful in a process because it leads to collective ownership and agency. And this was completely missing in this deal.
And you're still involved with the initiative? Are you still active? You never leave, no? Actually,
I'm very involved in canceling it. And well, okay, maybe that's a little bit harsh, but how do we find in this moment where we were completely voiceless, redemption, so that we can reclaim sovereignty and rise from the ashes of what was really badly done.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so from these spaces of relationships to maybe spaces now of narratives. And we know these are one of the key forces to stop deforestation. And we have actually very powerful examples in all of you. And there are many myths around forests that need to be reconstructed in many, many ways. No? And we need new narratives that are actually more systemic, and that, Anne, in your case, you help them emerge in the Philippines, and with the concrete example of the Masungi Reserve. And we've talked previously about these aha moments that you help create in the mindset of people. No? So what are some of these strategies and how do you implement them?
Right. So the baseline narrative we work with in Masungi is always focused on something positive and something hopeful in tone. Our narrative will always start by surfacing the identity and character of a place, or as one would put it, it's geography, weaving together elements of the landscape and the life that exists on it, from plants, animals to people. Here we pay attention to showcasing the uniqueness of these species, of these forms of life, their interdependence, and how these elements are in fact a part of a whole. We talk about sustainability and forest protection. It's important for everyone to understand, of course, what exactly it is that we're trying to restore, sustain, and protect. And these things can vary in the different places that we belong to. The more we grow to take pride in these places and understand why deforestation in these areas must specifically be stopped, the more we are also able to clear the true cost of its destructions in people's mind, identify what our unique places and all of it, and what action steps really are needed to get things moving forward, right? So from here, in Masungi, what we do is we then take this information to guide and influence the experience we would like to share to people, from how and where iconic stops are designed to the information and guidelines we share to those who visit, so that we can arrive at an unique, immersive, and thoughtful experience that builds a love of place. For this, we found it most impactful when interpretation is done in the form of storytelling with an authentic and personal voice coming from those who are defending it, and one that creates a change in knowledge, a change in mindset, and a change in behavior among those who visit. As a third point, we check, ultimately borrowing from the hospitality industry, how we might be able to keep in touch with our new lifelong friends and advocates that we get to build from these experiences, and how we can make it easier for them to pass the information along. These can take the form of opportunities to bring people over to see the place, a social media page to keep in touch with our millennial and youth base, events for our champions together, new experiences, volunteer opportunities, among others. So for instance, in Masungi, what we are protecting for nearly 3 decades now really is a karst landscape, also known as arcs of biodiversity. Its unique terrain affects the evolution of plants, particularly the air and rock plants, and animals such as snails, some of these even being unique to the place itself. Our reforestation site, one that is just in the upper reaches of a largely degraded watershed, apparently does not just affect the quality of water in our immediate community, but also impact just some 20 million Filipinos in our capital downstream. So our trail really focused on turning this character of place into an experience. Our discovery trail introduces our restored karst forest, giving hope to what really can be achieved in a lifetime. And our legacy trail focuses on the reforestation site, showing how deforestation has occurred in the area and how reforestation is done. So having just simple examples like how a balete tree that people are often scared of, being home to mythical dwellers, are magical not for that reason, but because they're home to a vast array of diversity. Doesn't just give new knowledge, but repeated many times over in an experience that lasts for 4 hours can also really make them rethink their relationship with nature. So in Masungi, we have received about 40,000 high-value guests prior to the pandemic. The qualitative evaluation of our experience has given us a score of 4.9 over 5, rounded down, and a 4.8 over 5 from a service experience survey online. We've also built an online following of some 240,000 people on Facebook, and some 42,000 others in other channels online, and a volunteer base of about 700. Over 200 companies and 40 schools have visited our trails. And online, our pages do not just showcase activism, but really share a greater sense of awe and wonder for the natural world, as well as aspirational and lifestyle posts, ultimately gaining following from a larger lifestyle and leisure space. So all of these really ultimately provide a fertile ground and a larger following for citizen-led social movements when responding to threats on the ground when it's needed. So from there, we can go on to negative communications where needed, supported by sufficient documentation, visualization through technology, a quick response system through the many champions and support bases we've built, and social fencing work on the ground. I think I've said a lot of things already.
Congratulations, and these numbers are impressive. And you and I talked about one of the enemies of this growing knowledge base being fake news and misinformation, of course. And I once heard you say something like, we are sowing the vision so that people have the space to answer to this misinformation. And I thought that was very powerful. How do you counteract this politics of polarization with these different interests in the Masungi Georeserve?
I'd also like to give a bit more context, I guess. So the Philippines can be a very challenging space to work with. Not only are we one of the 3 deadliest countries in the world for land defenders in the last decade consistently, but there's always an issue around red tagging, making it a very challenging space for activism. We have a financing gap of 80% for conservation, really leaving most of our protected areas as paper parks, essentially areas with legislation, but without management, ultimately where guns, goons, and gold still tend to reign. So today, this is truly worsened by disinformation, fake news, polarization, the climate of fear it causes, right? And the inaction and aversion to risk that it builds among people. So though the foundation for our action is basically the narrative and system that I've somewhat described earlier, on the ground, we've also learned how important it is to, just speak truthfully and faithfully when it comes to our vision, our reason for what we do, and to stay very firm with that even in the trickiest situation. This allows us really to find our strongest partners and allies as quickly as possible. And these are people who would understand what we do and would also share the same values that we cherish. This through times ultimately what has also brought us a degree of international attention and protection, which to an extent really has helped us navigate our national and local context, in addition to serving as reaffirmations of the direction and changes that we wish to make on the ground. So it's what's gotten us champions, all in all, who share the same values among government leaders, organizations, and groups. When it comes to movement on the ground and with the communities, in addition to getting to know those who have formal authority, we found it very valuable to search for people who are informal influencers and leaders, and to set aside time to immerse in the field through their eyes. Even without formal authority or active government support, organizing community members into many smaller groups where they could support and positively reinforce each other, no matter how simple members of the town they might be, can really help build the movement. So in my experience, these are mothers. They care for older members of the family, even of the community. They're left at home to immerse better in their localities, unlike their husbands who would move to cities. They serve as a witness to how the environment has changed and are very sensitive to how that could affect their children through time. So I always have the best chances of finding an ally among them. By extension, we get to know their sisters-in-law, their best friends, their sari-sari store owners that they talk to, their gossip circles, right? And all of these really help us share and disseminate the right information, and they help us listen out for ones that need to be corrected, no matter how small. At the macro level, the misinformation we want to correct and we need to have addressed could be significantly different from what people on the ground need to hear. It's also important here to just deconstruct where the fear comes from among these groups and the illusions that may have been built by unscrupulous entities, and just to create a safe and neutral space to discuss and understand one another. I think Cynthia somehow touched on this as she was talking a while ago. We have dealt with fake priests on the ground, which we were thankful to be able to debunk, land squatting syndicates, pretending to work for a senator, et cetera, et cetera. When we first met indigenous people in a remote area where we were doing reforestation work, they were hesitant to talk to us because we were going against a member of the military, and they would be questioning someone who could be a member of the military. The moment the military is involved, they do not want to talk. Unfortunately, despite a conflict involving us getting shot at by the military some 6 years ago in the last election season, the military is now a conservation partner for our organization. So this too, of course, came with a lot of effort, discussions, finding common ground. But because of this success, we are now able to host neutral spaces for different members of the community to get to know one another and set aside differences to work together for conservation. It really benefits not just the conservation advocacy, but just safeguarding spaces to talk in the field. And last but not the least, I guess just communicating and demonstrating that we also take the enforcement work very seriously and that we're capable of defending ourselves when we need to, despite the kindness and youthfulness that we demonstrate on the ground. So in the last 2 years, we're fortunate to have already recovered 2,000 hectares of the 2,700 hectares we're tasked to protect. And despite the pandemic, we've been able to combat 9 large-scale land grabbers and developers in the field.
Very powerful, and thanks for sharing. I love the mothers, as agents of misinformation. That's a beautiful insight. Thank you for sharing. And now I would like to take it maybe a bit from narratives to a more mindset space, which is obviously connected, And we know that there continues to be this duality, of mindset between people versus environment, between development and conservation. And Luis, you've been working in this space for a very, very long time. And now you have a perspective, a very solid perspective, actually, from 2 opposite sides in Brazil, What are some of the patterns that you're seeing in this mindset shift?
Yes, well, thank you very much. I think we are in the time of oppositions, right? And I think there is a dispute of narrative, there are disputes of interests, but I think they are a lot based on a time frame. We still have short-term interests, we still have short-term private interests, and we have the long-term public interests. And now we need to put all these together. I think the key word from the climate change, the two keywords are emergency and urgency. And there is only one direction. We can't talk anymore about oppositions because we need to go in one direction to tackle climate change. Otherwise, we're going to have catastrophic futures. And we know very well now that actually, as I think Anne used the word interdependence. So nature, economy, health, wealth are totally interdependent. And now if we are destroying natural resources, if we are destroying forests, we are destroying our future. And I'd like to share you just one image for us to understand a little bit about what I'm talking about, bringing a Brazilian experience of our two main tropical forests. On the left side, we have the Amazon on the upper side of the map, and in the lower side, we have the Atlantic forests, the two most important tropical forests of Brazil, and two of the most important tropical forests of the world. They are sisters. These two forests are sisters. 30 years ago, they were one single forest, and they were separated by our last ice age, but they still have some very, very small connections. And in the left side, we can see these two forests 500 years ago, before the Europeans arrived in South America. And on the right side, you have the current situation of the Amazon and the Atlantic forest. What is very, very, very concerning. If you look at the Atlantic forest, you can see small green and red dots. That is the remaining vegetation. We have lost almost 80% of the original cover of the Atlantic forest. And in the Amazon, we still have 80%, but a lot was lost as well. And to tackle climate change, we need to think about two actions. In one side, we need to stop deforestation immediately. That means stopping the emissions of greenhouse gases that come from deforestation. And in the other hand, the second most important nature-based solution is to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, is to plant trees, to restore our forests. And this is what we are talking about, that we need to stop deforestation of the Amazon and make restoration of the Atlantic forest. They are the two most important contributions that Brazil may offer to the world, and they are the cheapest, the simplest ways to tackle climate change now until 2030. We have the policies to achieve this problem, but we still need to have much more collaboration and complementary of public policies and private policies to achieve that. SOS Mata Atlântica, for instance, we have planted for almost 30 years 42 million trees. We have restored 23,000 hectares. It's a lot, and it's almost nothing compared to the challenge we have to do here. We need to plant only in the Atlantic forest 5 million hectares of forest to protect our water springs and rivers. And I'd like to end saying that restoring forests is not only about greenhouse gases emissions and climate change. Is about assuring ecosystem services that we depend on. In the Brazilian Atlantic forest live 70% of Brazilians and relies 80% of the GDP. And now we lack water, we may lack food, we may lack electricity, all depend on the ecosystem service of these forests. And besides that, we have all the social components that Cynthia already mentioned, the indigenous people, the traditional communities that live in the Amazon and that live in the Atlantic forest and that actually have contributed to protect what we have left now. So I'll stop sharing my screen and we can talk more about that.
Thank you, Luis. When you showed me this graph, I called it the crying graph because it's devastating to see the progress. No? And when you talk about conservation and restoration, no? As these two paradigms that need to be addressed together, you also talk very much about data as being one of the cornerstones of these two models. And at Ashoka, we're extremely happy that Tasso Acevedo has been named Skoll Awardee of this year for his work with map biomas. And I know, Luis, that you have been working in certification for many years at Imaflora, but now also in SOS Atlântica, you have been contributing to the development of map biomas. What are some of the lessons specifically around the concept of collective research and knowledge that you have from all of these years of experience, and that we can also maybe extrapolate to other fields?
Yes, SOS Mata Atlântica is one of the founders of map biomas like Imazon, with Beto just arrived, and he's also one of the inspiring leaders to create such an initiative. First, what I think the most impressive thing from Tasso that inspire everyone is that nothing is impossible. So it's impossible to construct a map that tells the story of land use change from 3 decades ago. This is what he heard. And he said, no, it's not impossible. We can do that. There is nothing impossible. Another thing that Tasso says a lot is that now, because of climate change and the emergency, again, the emergency and the urgency, we need to be very ambitious in our solutions. So NGOs, companies, governments, we need to be very ambitious. There is no time for pilots. We need to solve the problem in a very few years. We need to reduce. The last IPCC report said we need to cut emissions in more than 40% until 2030. We have 1 decade to make a huge change. And then the lessons from map biomas, I think the most important thing is the network and the collaboration. Map biomas is a collaboration of NGOs, universities, and startups, technology startups. We have very different skills in our team. It brings almost 100 people are working in Brazil and around the globe. But we share the same values. I think this is very important to put a team together. Second, I think the other very, very important lesson is also the multidisciplinary work that we have geographers, biologists, GIS guy, computer modelers, foresters, agronomists, every kinds of social scientists working together. And finally, I think from map biomas is the use of the most sophisticated technology translated in a very simple message and communication that really reaches decision makers and policymakers and anyone in the world. So we have thousands of algorithms, high resolution maps, very, very sophisticated and complicated things that I can even explain, but they arrive for a policymaker very easily. This is deforestation, this is the alert, take decisions.
So congratulations also, Luis, from your side for SOS Mata Atlântica. And I agree that map biomas is proof of the impossible, no? And it's a source of hope. And I think this is the perfect connection also to Beto's work. Welcome, Beto, by the way. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
And Beto, you're a true expert in this understanding of multilateral governance, no? Both from a local, regional to a global perspective. And we know that international interests are affecting local dynamics to a very big extent, and that the problem and the solution are no longer regional and local, no? And so what are some of the learnings that you have in this space, and that also you can take them to the enforcement and law government structures from the experience that you have?
I just like to go back a little bit more and elaborate and a little bit more what Luis Fernando say about the map biomas, because it's explained the social software behind solutions, because I have to understand the way to address those issues, especially relate to common goods like forests and biodiversity. I think the elements there, they have what it is typically fits in the collective impact approach. You have a goal, a very specific goal, either to reduce deforestation or to mapping. In the case of Mapi Bioma, was a very clear goal. The metrics was established. We have to have the maps to tell the story. And TASO and others work as a backbone. And the backbone, usually the best way to do a backbone and not to be the specialized guy. TASO is not the guy. He's not the guy, the front running of satellite images. He's probably the less well-known in the group. He never actually was training but that was the right person, because he has to be able to hire people, to invite people, because he's not in a competition field of knowledge. He's actually a different type of mind. And then the backbone creates elements of collaboration and synergies. That's very difficult to do so. It's very difficult to address those issues because there's a lot of ego, a lot of brand around, a lot of people think differently. And the problem is that we do the good people fighting to each other instead of fighting the problem. And then they have the communication element that Luis Fernando explained a little bit, that the capacity to tell a story, the capacity to cross and to be used this information by public attorney, for the judiciary, for the legislative branch, the executive power, the private sector, the NGOs, the indigenous community. So the information has a power. Only we'll be able to develop such kind of a powerful software. So I think that's something that actually to be replicated. If you want to face problems in Congo Basin, in Southeast Asia, although the problems might be different, the actors will be different, but I strongly believe it. The only way to do through this kind of collaboration, and you have to have people like TASO in Congo Basin and Southeast Asia, and they have to, in this sense, Mapi Biomas is a very, very good example of how to design a collaboration in a very structured way to achieve things that are very difficult to achieve and problems that sometimes unsolvable. I think back to the Amazonia, the Brazilian Amazonia, where I have worked for the last 3 decades. I think we know, I try to define the agenda in 3 major fields. One is the conservation field. So we know how to do. We know how to set up protected areas. We know how to implement those areas. So we have been quite successful, Brazil and our partners here, to create protected areas. When the political opportunities arrive, we create in a short period of time, 4 years, an area big as France, as Portugal, in just 2 years of protected areas, back to the 2003, 2006. So why was this possible? Because we have the methodology to create these areas, we have the satellite images, you know how to do the consultation process, to writing a technical document that feeds the government decision to create a decree. That's the most important human achievement in terms of protection on our history. It's equivalent even more than Ted Roosevelt did 100 years ago in the US. So we know how to do. If the political conditions open again, you know how to go further, because they still have areas in the Amazonian region to be protected. Second, we have developing the capacity to do enforcement in a very efficient way, using satellite image. And then when the opportunities arrive, the enforcement field inspection was very effective. And both the conservation and, let's say, the enforcement together reduced deforestation 80% back to 2004, 2012. So again, we have this understanding. New knowledge comes into place. The monitoring is more sophisticated now. We have now not only understand what's happened 2 weeks ago, but now we have a mapping to anticipate what's going to happen in 1 month ahead. So we create maps that actually anticipate what deforestation is going to happen. This is an initiative running by Imazon, Microsoft, and Vale, Fundo Vale in Brazil. So our knowledge is just increased in a very good way. The third element that it has been hard for us on the social and conservation field is to understand the development dynamics. And I think you have to put other people on the table. And then I have been very involved in the last 2 years in an initiative called Amazonia 2030 initiative. It's an initiative that's, again, built on MapBiomas methodology that actually builds on the collective impact approach. Amazonia 2030 is the same. I'm the backbone guy. I'm not an economist by training, but I hire the best economics, the best people in the country that understand developing, the developers, the economists, to tackle the challenge of to develop the region with forests, standing forests and low carbon economy. Right now we are in the process to, and the idea for the first phase was actually to have a kind of blueprint. Okay, if you want to save the Amazon, what's going to be the main solutions when you think what the issues of social dimension they have to put in place, the question of safety, question for property rights, the right incentives to develop a forest-based economy. And sometimes it's counterintuitive. If you come to the conservation field, you just jump into the development field and think the ideas that you think there works here, you might get in the wrong direction. Although you have a good intention, but the results might be not good. So I think that's the field that I'm giving one example of things that I never heard before. But when people think about agroforestry and no timber forest product, in Brazil at least, people think about the social agenda. Say, that's the products that poor people produce to sell for a boutique market. So it's very small market. It's very, the production is very small. The market is very small. When they have policy, the policy is not mainstream policy, it's just policy that, so nobody pay attention. And then we commission a work, a study to see what's the size of the market for those products that Amazonia, Brazilian Amazonia already exported in tiny quantities, very small quantities. So it's basically tropical fruits, a fish, agroforestry products, and some typically forest products, timber forest products. So those 4 elements, they have a global market for just 65 products that Amazon already exported in a very small, tiny fraction of $200 billion a year. And one of those products, just one example, values more than 10 times than the red mechanism that we have. We have talked about red as something very important, but the amount of money that actually flow from red mechanism to local economy, it's very small yet. And people, so we spend a lot of time thinking about this, and that's important. But our energy just go out in this direction and forget about things that actually happen. There is already a market. There is already opportunity, and Brazilian Amazon participates in 0.1% of this market. This product is able only to produce in the equator line. There's a climate conditions. We are not allowed to produce this products in US or in Europe or in Australia. You have to produce in the equator line. So there is nothing complicated. There is no single developing nation in the equator line. So although Brazil has very, very low participation in this market, this agenda was absolutely out of the debate. Everybody that we present the paper say, that's the first time I heard about it. I never thought about that was the size of market. I have no idea about we can do much more. And that's just one example of we are kind of blind about this debate. And I think we need to pay attention more. And there's a lot of things that's very low hanging fruits to take. So we talk about very sophisticated things and forget about something that more in front of us. So we have to have these three elements of developing and the conservation and the enforcement of the rule of law to be able to save places like Amazonia. I'm assuming that will go to be the same challenge in other places in the tropics.
And talking about exportation, Beto, and with this relevant conservation, enforcement, development, collective impact approach that you're sharing, if we work upstream, no, in terms of consumption, how can this experience convince, in terms of narrative, no, to the regular CEO or citizen consumer sitting far away from Brazil?
I think it makes sure that without development, there is be no forest. That people need, there's people that lives in place like the Amazonia, they looking for a better way of life. If the forest is not going to be provided, if your economy that we want to design around the idea of conservation forest is not deliver those kind of social benefits, it will be very difficult for us to save, because there will be a political will outside the region. So we want to, okay, if you're Europe, you want to conserve the Amazon. If you are in Sao Paulo, where Luis Fernando live now, but you have to have the political support at local level, at regional level. And I have to think the forest is part of the culture, your identity, that's very important as well. It's something that help you to have a better life. And so the idea of to have products that in some sense provide goods and service. I think the question of service, because the service we don't receive a payment for the service that we provide. This has been a discussions, we have the 20 years of discussions about paying for environmental service. Nothing actually is materialized yet. So just a discussion. Example, very tiny example. So I'm thinking about, back to your point, the products that we can produce there is going to be part of a basket of solutions. But that was a very important element, because an element that we can start it. Sometimes people think about the new frontier of the forest is going to provide solutions of the medicines or the food for the future, the fibers for the future. That's fine. That's great. Let's look at, but let's look as well what actually we have in hands. So the futuristic approach had to be balanced between the pragmatic approach, and that was the balance that we need. It's easy to get to be lost in this idea of that we're going to discover a molecular in the Amazon that's going to value, and then we are going to save the indigenous tribe because this molecular is going to save. Up to now, there was no a single example those molecular has been saved something relevant. That's promising. We have to look at, but the way to address the battle of developing is actually to more things things that are more in front of us. There are a lot of low-hanging fruits. There are things that are not so fashion, because people want to have a fashion ideas, something very silver bullets. No silver bullets. It's the ideas that's part of their daily lives, and that's the developing has been played around. So I think I learned by being interactive with those people that think about development. So back to you.
Thank you, Beto. So from future to present, as you were saying, and seeing as forests, no, as part of our identity and culture. Cynthia, you and I have talked about this, and Einstein used to say, no, that the problems of today cannot be solved with the same consciousness that created them, no, in the past. So we go from present to past. And when we last spoke, you shared some very powerful, bold, wise to me truths about this solidarity mindset and this new leadership paradigm. And I felt very inspired from it. So I would love if you could share some of that wisdom with us.
I think you have been talking about a lot the reasons why.
I was asking Cynthia, sorry, Beto.
Okay, sorry.
And
okay.
we can go to you after.
Okay, great, sorry.
Thank you.
We can also dialogue about it. I think as I'm listening to everyone, I'm thinking, the state of our landscapes, the state of our forests, the fragmentation is so symptomatic of our bodies, of our body politic, our relationships, and our nation states. So in answering your question, Alex, I think we currently focus on skills, on building capacity, on technology. We rack our brains, we push our bodies, we beat ourselves up, and then we burn out. But trauma, as I brought up earlier, is embodied in us. It's in our organizations, it's in our formats, it's in our institutions, it's in our governments. Colonization of self and state severed our, relational tissue, as I call it, and some of my new allies call it. And this has gone into our bodies. And we're grasping at solutions at the same levels our traumas were inflicted. We've built walls, we built defense, we built systems to protect those traumas. And that same protection becomes the barriers that distance us and that limit our solutions. So what if we focused on tending to growing relational tissue in ourselves, our families, our communities, our movements, our governments even? I came across again with this group of allies that, someone started something called Rest as Resistance. How will I be useless to capitalism today? What if we rested our bodies? What if we scaled deep rather than scale up or out? What if we build relational capacity and solidarity beyond partnerships, beyond collaboration? What would solving our problems look like then?
Beto? Sorry, I interrupted earlier.
No, it's nice to hear. So I just, to have a question for me or just...
No, what is your experience? I think Cynthia is creating this space of relationship tissues and of this solidarity mindset and this new leadership paradigm, which we all try to embody at many levels. What is your experience with leadership in that space?
Well, maybe in two aspects. One thing that I truly believe that we have a lot of reasons to conserve rainforest. The question is, the reasons is kind of utility, sometimes more utilitarian reason. We need the forest. We need the forest because they provide us service. And I think that we need to love the forest. You have to create a relationship that goes beyond the utilitarian relationship that we have with things in the planet. So I truly believe that. And I think we have to pay attention. We have to pay attention to the dimensions of spirituality and culture and arts, because those the talents that have a connection with the soul, and that need to be put in as something relevant. So that's every time we just focus on the utilitarian approach, I think we lose the ground because people are not what drives people is not only at the end of the day the utilitarian decisions. They drives because sometimes on a part of our hearts there is something, or her hearts there is something beyond that, and then the human nature is more complicated. It's more and I think we lost a lot of things when we design projects and design theory of change and design strategy, foundations design. No, forget about this. It's not important. It's something that we cannot measure, something that we cannot influence. And at the end of the day, we miss the big picture. So we try to incorporate this in a lot of things we are doing. And we try to be very clear that although the more, let's say, rational approach is important, the empirical, the pragmatic, and that was just part of what had to be done.
So this is a good fertile ground for my last question. And the theme of this Skoll World Forum is face forward. which I think is powerful. So let's travel forward to the year 2030, and let's imagine that year with a mindset of hope also and possibility. What is the local or global newspaper of reference? What is the headline of that newspaper that you would like to read?
Start with maybe with Fernando.
Yeah, well, 2030 is a deadline for many commitments and goals. And I think the one that has to be achieved, the red line, is that deforestation is past.
And Cynthia?
What he said. I hope
That'll
so
be
too.
No, that'll be fantastic. All this news relate to end of deforestation, but also news about the first time we understand what the forest is speaking. The trees are speaking to each other. The mushrooms are speaking to each other. I think that the science is getting there. There was a piece yesterday in the Guardian is about the mushroom communications. I think the living living creatures, the creatures are speaking. That goes one dimension. That's change way, or we're talking about trees and trees, like people think there's a passive organism, but it's actually intelligent organism. They have been around for so many. There's another news that I like to hear, but I fully expected deforestation and deforestation together with this kind of new way of think about nature.
Good title and subtitle. Anne?
Wow, how could you all consume everything I wanted to say? I also had deforestation in mind, and the mycelial network and all of that definitely points to a deeper level of understanding of how interdependent everything is. But perhaps one other thing I'd like to add is how, because I love audacious goals, how hopefully by 2030 we would have already reached a regenerative economic model that really allows for a planet in balance. Yeah.
So this is 2030. We're opening the newspaper. We're opening the newspaper, and we see deforestation is past. The living creatures are speaking. Deforestation has ended, and we have reached a regenerative economic model that allows for planet and climate to thrive. Thank you all very much, Cynthia.
And we're all taking more naps.
Exactly, resting as a sign of protest. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Anne, Cynthia, Beto, Luis, for your wisdom. It's been a pleasure. Thanks also to the teams and the networks behind all the work that you do, because we're aware that you are the faces of huge organizations and networks that are also part of this success. And thanks also to our longtime partners at the Skoll Foundation. Everything and this conversation is thanks to you. So it's been a pleasure, and have a wonderful day, evening for you, Cynthia, and morning for you, Luis and Beto.